sorry when I walk, boy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me, whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording. I appreciate you watching. Today we're just going to do a quick demo going through some Bootstrap stuff just to kind of hammer things home as we're getting finished here with our current module, Module 4. So I've already developed a website here. I've just done some basic HTML and really that's it, right? Like I have just some standard HTML markup. Put an image in here, put some headers and a main and some paragraphs, threw a couple lists in there, some different heading levels in there. Just made a super simple, super basic website for us to bootstrapify, if you will, today. We can kind of look at what it looks like here. If we look over here. Let me grab this window from my other monitor. It doesn't want to cooperate here at the moment. There it is. So super simple, right? Right now, no CSS, no nothing here, just super basic website. This is what it looks like right now. We'll go to getbootstrap.com, the home of Bootstrap. And we'll add Bootstrap to our project, and then we'll go through the Bootstrap documentation and just kind of pick some stuff that we can kind of look at here and add it to our site, just to do a few examples, right? But if you watched the last video content, which would have been a couple weeks ago, right? We didn't have one last week. If you watched the last live class video, you would have seen just how dramatic things are just when you add the Bootstrap package. And so here on getbootstrap.com, I'm just going to scroll down the page here a little bit. I'm going to include via CDN here. So I'm going to use this CDN link. And remember that we only need to use the first one. The first one is for the CSS library. The second one here is for the JavaScript library. Me personally, I don't like the JavaScript stuff that's in Bootstrap. Don't really need it. And especially for our purposes here, don't really see a use for it. So I'm just going to click the little clipboard here to copy that and add it to my project here. So I'm going to add it above my link to my other style sheet here. So I have a link to another style sheet in my project. So I'm going to add the link to Bootstrap first and then add the link to the customization sheet. Right, and this is just going to, allow us to render our Bootstrap in order, or render our CSS in order, I should say. So we'd be rendering the Bootstrap first, then it would request the style.css and render that out. So we could make some customizations and changes. So, that is something for you all to kind of remember as you're approaching this, right? Like if you put your style sheet first and then put the Bootstrap after it. The Bootstrap, or what you do, your customizations can be overridden by what's in Bootstrap. So you want to make sure that you are putting your CSS second, right? So you can make some changes and add some stuff. Right, but I'm just going to save this. Sorry about that. I'm just going to save this document here so we can see how it looks. And just based on, that one thing, right, we see a whole bunch of changes here. We see that it's taken away some of the default browser margin and padding that we get when we, just make a basic default website. We see that it's changed my font here. It's given us some Open Sans font instead of our standard kind of Arial or standard Times New Roman serif for, our standard Arial sans serif. So it's a very different font. Still no real colors or anything applied here yet. We still got to add that ourselves. But what I want us to kind of do is I want us to kind of look through the Bootstrap documentation here, which I have that in another window, but you could also get there by clicking Docs here on the getbootstrap.com website. It takes you to the same place. It's going to take you to the Bootstrap documentation. I believe in the last video you all saw, you got a little rundown of this documentation. This is a good documentation for you all to kind of read and use. It is super simple, right? I think they do a good job of it. Not everything is going to be pertinent to you. Like when you get into like some of these customization options, that's if you want to customize the Bootstrap itself. So like if we look at some of this stuff, like what we're looking at here is basically the pre-rendered Bootstrap. So we wouldn't be doing that unless we were actually hosting Bootstrap ourselves on a SaaS-based server. You know, a lot of this stuff that's here in this customize isn't really important to us, because that's pre-rendered Bootstrap, not post-rendered, which is what we're getting when we're using a CDN. But a lot of the other stuff here is going to be relevant to us. You know, we can look at the content. We can look at form controls. I don't have any form control examples in our document today. But, I mean, you know, everything kind of works the same, and it does give you examples here of kind of what you're looking at. And you can see different sizes. Right, remember that a lot of the big things here is just that, you know, this is all stuff that we could do with CSS ourselves, but it's a lot easier because somebody else already did it for us. So we can just kind of go through here and look at this stuff. One of the big things that I like to use it for is the grid. Right, so I believe I talked about the grid system a little bit in the video previously. I don't quite remember. But remember that when we're dealing with a grid, we have two different ways that we can deal with a grid. We can just do columns inside of our container. Right, so here we see we have a container with a div with a class of container. And then some columns here. Each of these, you know, this is in a row. And then we have a class of columns here, and these columns auto width columns, so they take up 3 equal columns based on this documentation. We could also set widths, right, using numbers. And remember, you know, one of the things that we talked about previously, I'm pretty sure of it, is that when we were using columns here, we're using them in rows of 12 wide. So we have the column system in Bootstrap is 12 columns wide. So if we're doing this here where we're saying like class call 6, row, you know, class call 5, right? We just want to make sure that the resulting number adds up to 12. If it goes beyond 12, it's going to wrap around to another line. So one of the things that we might want to do here, for example, is in our header, right? I have a container here, and I can put all this in a row and make each of these items its own thing, right? So I can give the header a class of container. If I wanted to add more here, right, one of the things that I could do is I could add a div with a class of row. Remember that div is not semantic, so div on its own has no meaning. So if we just wanted something to kind of section off some of our things to where we can lay it out a little bit differently, we can use divs. But in general, we're not going to use divs because we would rather use something that has a meaning. And then we can just add different classes here based on the size of our column. So I might say call 3 here for the image. And then I might want this H1 and this paragraph to go together. So I can wrap those in their own div with a call of a class equals call dash 9. So that adds up to 12. Right, so now I've created a grid where I have one column that is 3 columns wide, one column that is 9 columns wide. So if I were to save this and then we were to look at our project site, we can see kind of how it works here. Right, we can see that, okay, if we kind of use our inspect element tool to look at our box model, like we can look at this column here and see where it is. That's the column 9 there. We can look at the column 3 there. We see it's not a full width column. We can make a full width column by, I believe it is container dash fluid, if I remember correctly. This would be something that I would, look up in the documentation because I don't quite remember. Yeah, there we go. Container dash fluid gives me a full width container. So now if I look at this 9 column, call 9 goes up 9 columns across. Our image goes 3 columns across, and we can kind of see, when we look at the box model here using our developer tools, what this is actually doing behind the scenes, right? Like we can actually see that this column is 3 times as large as this image. Another thing that we might want to do is, maybe just make this a little bit smaller, right? So we can just adjust these numbers accordingly. Basically, just so long as they add up to 12, everything is cool. So I can just have a call here and a call 11 here. Right, and then, whoops, didn't want to do that. Wanted to do call 1, call dash 1. Because call just makes it 1 column, or makes the whole thing 1 column wide, which is what we saw there with Big Pumpkin. So if we save that now, we have a call 1 and a call 11, which is going to give me a little pumpkin and a Bugsy's Haunted Trail. And, some of the things that we can see going on here with our image, right, is, remember that an image is an inline element instead of a block level element. But we see here, just on the basis of using Bootstrap, Bootstrap is treating that like a block level element. We can also see that it's resizing the image accordingly. So if I have a slightly bigger container, right, like if I make that a 2 wide column instead of a 1 wide column, and make that a 10 wide column instead of an 11 wide column, we can see it adjust accordingly. Like it may, the pumpkin grew to fit its container, and everything else is still there. And if we look at the box model through the developer tools here, we can see, kind of where everything stretches out to go. Which is pretty cool. Right, and another thing that we would want to look at here, right, is the fact that this resizes. This is scalable, right? We did say it's fluid. So it's automatically responsive web design here. Like if I scale down my browser here, scale it up, we see that it scales automatically. I don't have to try to do any sort of fancy responsive web design CSS here. I can just make it what I want it to be, and that's fine. One of the things that we saw, though, is that if we take something and we make it just a container, that it kind of pulls it in from the sides a little bit. So that's something I can do here, right? Like I can go down to my main here and give it a class equals container. And that will give me a bit of a gutter here on the left and right. You see, so it pulled it from the left a little bit. It pulled it from, it shrunk that container in width, pulled it from the left a little bit, pulled it from the right a little bit. And then we still have this full width container at the bottom for the footer down here. You know, one of the big things about Bootstrap here is the speed of development. I'm pretty sure I mentioned that in the last video that you all saw. It's been a couple weeks. Just how fast it does, like it allows you to build something that looks good. You know, one of the things that we see oftentimes with a Bootstrap site is a lot of them look kind of samey. You know, just because they are kind of being built off of that same foundation. But if we are wanting to build something that looks good and build it quickly, it allows us to do things super fast like that, which is pretty cool. So that's some basics of some, you know, just kind of layout that I wanted to look at there. Let's look at some typography stuff here really quickly. We'll go down to content here in our documentation and we'll click on typography. We can see here that headings by default have a certain styling to them. We can also, if we want to give this same styling to a paragraph or something like that, we can give it a class of that styling. So if I wanted to make this paragraph here look like, say, an H6 while still functionally acting like a paragraph, I can give it a class equals H6 here. And then when we look at our site, that's going to look like an H6 while still functioning like a paragraph. You know, I can make adjustments to that too as I see fit. Like maybe I want it a little bit bigger or a little bit bigger still, right? I've got it in another window here, which is why I'm kind of... So if I do that, right, we can kind of see like, oh, okay, well that kind of works. That looks pretty good. Pretty cool. Some other stuff is that you can use display headings instead of just, well, you can also use this text body secondary here as another additional class as well, right? And so remember that you can use multiple classes for a particular element. So I can also add a text-body-secondary here. And when we pull that over now, we can see that our subheader here is a little lighter in color now, right? It's a little more gray where it was a lot darker. Kind of hard to tell, but it is, you know, like if you kind of go back and forth a little bit, like you can see it does work. Another thing that we see from this is our display headings. We can add a display 1, display 2, display 3. So if I wanted to take that big heading at the top there, I can add to this H1, I can add a class is display-1. And that's going to give me an even bigger image there at the top, or title there at the top, which is pretty cool. We can kind of go back over here, go back through some of the other stuff that we kind of have going on here. We see here lead for a lead paragraph. I can add a class of lead. So if I wanted to add a class of lead to this first paragraph, it's going to take that first paragraph and make it look different, right? So we see how a normal paragraph would look here. Secondarily, we see how the first paragraph looks different now, which is pretty cool. You know, we just kind of use that to give emphasis to particular paragraphs or do whatever. And again, you know, like a lot of this is just to demonstrate how fast making these changes can be. we are just kind of going through here and doing things pretty quickly. I encourage you all to kind of go through here and have a look at this. Just so we can see, kind of what's going on in our documentation. Go through and look at the documentation. If that's one thing that you get out of this class is that, reading documentation is just as big as anything else. So if you can kind of figure out how to look at the documentation, read it, use the examples, then that's going to help you a lot. We have some image stuff here as well. Right, we've kind of already done some stuff with our image here, so I'm not going to really use any of these in my document. But it is something that's going to give you the ability to, do some interesting stuff with images quickly, which is pretty cool. Let's see here. Let's look at some others. What do we want to look at? We can look at some spacing stuff here, right? Margin and padding. Like if I want to add some margin or add some padding to something, I can use an M class or a P class. And so say if I want to add a little bit of, say, padding to the top of this H1 here to kind of push it down a little bit. I can add to that H1, I can add a class of P dash some value, right? In this case, we'll try out to, we'll talk about kind of what that does, right? Because we see here the size of is the spacer, which is a variable value in Bootstrap. So it's a spacer times 0.5 for 2, 0.25 for 1. Right, so in this case, like we see, I did P-2. It's pulled it in to the right a little bit. It's pulled it down from the top a little bit. Yeah, I only want it to be pulled down from the top. I don't necessarily want it to be pulled in from the right any. I'm kind of okay with where it's at. Or maybe I want it to be pulled down a little bit more from the top. I can add another class that's PT dash say 4. And PT is padding top, right? So we just have all around padding here, padding top here. And then maybe here in this secondary paragraph, I can add a PL dash 5, something like that, right? Or just P dash 5. P dash 5 and then PT dash 0. To kind of push it in from the left. And remember that we can take advantage of stuff like that, right? Because as we cascade, it's going to change the values. So even though this value changed padding top as a part of changing all of the padding values, the cascade of changing the padding top to 0 changed it back, right? So it just took that padding that we applied there with P5 and took it back off. Which worked. Let's see here. Let's do a few other things here. We can kind of look at text here because I think I want to center up the footer. Center up the text in the footer, so we have a paragraph in the footer for the copyright information. We can see that I have text start, text center, text end. So I could add a class equals text dash center here. And that's going to center up that footer. Right, so this gives me some good basics, right? And so then I can kind of go back into here and use my stylesheet.css to make some customizations. Like maybe I want to say, oh, main should be background color white. The header too should also be background color white. Let's take the body and make it background color orange, which is going to be like hashtag FF7700. Right, maybe for my footer, I can do color white, background color is like a dark gray, so like a 525252, or I did 535353 there. That's good enough. Right, and we can look at that and we can see some changes here, right? And we can see some things that's going on. And so when we start to make some changes like that to our document, we can also see some things that we might want to do via our Bootstrap as well. Like if we look at our footer container here, that's not really aligned well. So I probably want to, since my header and my main are containers, I should probably also make my footer a container. So I should make that class equals container dash fluid. Right, I also might want to give this, say, a min height here. So I can say something like min height, 200 pixels. Something like that. You know, we can see we've got a little bit of margin here. So we might want to say on our main, we might want to make that, you know, add an MB-0 class to that. Right, or maybe we want to put like a padding bottom -3 to that. Right, you know, just stuff that you can kind of test out. Right, I probably also want to put a little bit of padding top on that just to give that a little bit of breathing room from the top. So PT-3. You know, maybe do something with that, you know, footer paragraph, add a little margin on that. We can do that through Bootstrap as well. So we could add just like a MT5 here. Or actually, I want to put a PT5 there. I don't want a PT5 because that's going to push it. I want that. I just want that. And so we end up with a pretty cool website here, right? And it didn't take us very long to build it, right? We were under 30 minutes in the construction of this website, or in the construction of styling this website. Right, we can do a lot of stuff in terms of customizations here. Like I can take, and in my custom style sheet, I can maybe make my H2s a different color. So I could say H2s can be color, let's make it like a brown. So let's make it like 884400. Right, just to kind of, you know, match our aesthetic, or maybe something like this green of our jack-o'-lantern stem here at the top, so a slightly darker green. So maybe something like a, let's see here, what would that be? Something like a 234400 is probably pretty close. A little bit of red to make it warm. Actually, I might want to make that a little brighter in the green department. So maybe something like 2368. That gets it a little bit closer to that stem. That looks pretty good. All right, in just a few minutes, we took something that had absolutely zero styling. We made it, not only did we make it look pretty decent, we also made it responsive. Right? So, there's, like when we get down really small here, there might be some things that we want to do here with that image via, say, a media query or something like that, because that looks kind of weird. But it's also responsive. Like, honestly, the thing that we would do there would be, I do a little bit of JavaScript there and add class, add that call class if it is if the window is under a certain pixel width, so it actually takes the jack-o'-lantern and puts it up at the top instead of being there. But again, there's lots of stuff that you can do. I encourage you all to kind of look through the documentation. You can focus on grid, you can focus on typography, images. Ignore the components here because they require the JavaScript, so you can kind of ignore those. There are some like colors and backgrounds that are in Bootstrap by default. They're very limited, but you can also apply those to links, so it's something that you can kind of look at and apply there accordingly. Little icon links are kind of cool. A lot of cool stuff that you can kind of look through here, read the documentation, and get. And so as we kind of wrap up here, if you're here with me live, put any questions that you have in the chat. I will just kind of go through the process of putting this on GitHub really quickly. So we'll say github.com. I'm going to go to my icon up here in the upper right-hand corner. I'm going to go to my repositories. I'm going to create a new repository. I'm going to call this Bugsby's. Or Bugsies. Because that's what, I kind of named the website here. And we'll create that repository. And then we're just going to follow these instructions. I'm going to open a new terminal in VS Code. I'm going to run git init, git add period to add all the files, git commit -m first commit as my commit message. And so remember that that's going to create the history state on your machine. So once I do that, I can go back over to GitHub and I can pick up down here actually. I can add my origin. By just copying it and pasting it. Whether or not you want to change branches is up to you, right? By default, the branch is called master. So if you don't change your branches, this line would change to git push origin master. But if you change your branch to main here, like it suggests, then you can just copy and paste these two lines. Otherwise, I can just do a git push origin master. And it's going to send all my files. Boop, boop, boop. There they go. Now, if I refresh my page here on GitHub, we'll see my files there. Go to my settings, go to pages. switch to my master branch and save it to develop my GitHub pages. And here in just a minute, it'll give me a link. And so that's all that I have for you for today. We'll get this out to you as soon as possible so you all can have a look at it. But again, that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.